Supreme Court is allowing Alabama to reinstate a congressional map.
From the North Carolina Supreme
Hours ago,
Court.
Georgia's lawmakers approved a second Republican redistricting map that helps the GOP stay in power.
This constitutional procedure is required every 10 years to account for population shifts based on census data.
The reason that the Power Coalition got involved in the fight for fair and equitable maps is we view redistricting as our North Star in equitable work. It's a process that occurs only once over a decade, and it truly does determine who is elected in office, how they will potentially vote. And we all know that elected officials control every quality of a life.
We understood that, you can work all weekend in elections, we can be counted, but redistricting is the way the rules are made for political power. And so it is critically important for our community, one of the fastest growing in the entire country in Georgia, the Latinx community, to not only understand, but recognize how rules are made and how we participate in determining the potential for us to set legislation and representatives that represent and that reflect the priorities for our communities.
We are charged with building a multiracial democracy here in Tennessee. And when you really think about how power is built, redistricting is really the genesis of that power. So, in the age-old scenario, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And whatever you believe comes first in that scenario, redistricting is what comes first when it comes to power building.
Before redistricting even began at the legislative level, we were reaching out to organizations across the state who particularly work in these areas and also with people of color and communities of color in these regions to begin educating on this once-in-a-decade process, what it looked like in the past in Texas, what was at stake, and what we could do, what the community could do to get involved, beginning with the legislative session and beyond.
We made the connection as to why it was important to have the right representation. And so we held community forums. We went to all of the neighborhoods across the state of Georgia, our 7 offices that we have located throughout the state. We made sure that we got people involved from around those areas, not just in metro areas. We provided some sub-grants to a lot of community organizations so they could help us get that word out about drawing their fair maps and why it was important.
In 2019, we began the Power Voter campaign, which was that an individual would vote in every single election, would hold elected officials accountable, and would also participate in the census and redistricting process, right? So we began that conversation again almost 3 years ago about census, why it was important to get counted, how these resources were dispersed and why it was needed, particularly again in BIPOC communities in the Deep South, and how that connected to redistricting and fair representation.
Since launching in 2021, Alabama Values has worked closely with grassroots organizers and regional partners working to advocate for fair maps and adequate representation. Now, during this cycle, we set out to be a strategic communications thought partner, messaging and content developer, and media amplifier for redistricting organizers. We realized that while organizers were on the ground raising awareness, building relationships, and becoming trusted messengers, they needed tools. They needed tools to connect the fight for fair maps to the front door of people, right? In a way that was culturally relevant, relatable, and digestible. So we developed digital organizing toolkits that provided talking points, social media campaigns that partners could brand and post within their digital communities. We held public briefings that incorporated online trends. We launched our own in-house content-heavy digital campaigns, such as our vlog, What the What. We also provided unique campaign development and social media management for state partners.
Alabama Forward's approach to redistricting was rooted first in listening to our members' interests and amplifying this issue and making sure that our member organizations had resources to go out and educate their community members, that they had training, and that there was an actual base where people could return to on a reoccurring schedule. We ended up developing a bi-weekly session that Alabama Forward was chiefly responsible for co-organizing along with our crowd fellows. That was just a great space for people to get to know each other, for us to sort of lean into what some of the concepts would be and play with metaphor in terms of explaining the importance of redistricting, to really think about the language and move over time from redistricting to fair maps or fair districting. So for our Shake the Field Caregiver Road Trip original music project, the second song that we wrote for that was the song Narissa's Home. It covers several themes, but at the center of it, it's a song talking about the concept of home and how that is impacted by maps and by redistricting. We were really thinking about people who don't want to sign up for the kinds of trainings and Zooms that we were signing up for. So who is that person that we really want, ideally, to be in these spaces that we're not seeing?
We had several highs and several lows. I think one of the most amazing feelings in the redistricting process this time around was seeing Texans, over 1,000 Texans from all across the state in over 8 different non-English languages, coming and testifying either in person or virtually for their reason on why Texans deserved fair representation, particularly those communities that had fueled the growth. It was really cool to see how Texas's diversity was displayed in these centers of power, and we're having their voices advocated and, spoken to the people that were actually going to be drawing these maps.
I think some of the lows have been really seeing advocates, not simply on the state congressional level, but on the local level, who are informed and educated and ready to provide effective and actionable testimony and guidance to their elected officials, and them being silenced either by a lack of transparency on the state and local level, a lack of public hearings that we've seen in many of our southern states, and really more examples of politicians ignoring the voices of the people they claim to serve in this process.
It was moments of happiness and frustration, right? The happiness happened when you knew that community was passionate and engaged about this process and wanted to fight for what was right. And that you had allies, and you had community members, and you had churches, and you had some elected leaders who were actually trying to stand on the right side of history. You knew that people were then willing to really get civically engaged and be involved within the democratic process, and just were interested in being educated on why this was so important, connecting the dots into why there are certain inequities within the democratic process and within their communities due to this redistricting.
Seeing people show up at hearings, right? Even when the hearings were in the middle of the day, or when the hearings were in the middle of nowhere in a major metropolitan city such as Charlotte, North Carolina, where there were no language services, where there were only 13 hearings for a state that has 100 counties. When we held trainings late in the evening, people showed up, people asked questions, people wanted to be engaged. And I think that was really the high of most of our work, was seeing the people power in action and knowing that nothing was going to stop us from fighting for the democracy that we all deserve.
Is that Black folks are, although a smaller portion of the voting bloc in the state of Florida, they are a powerful voting bloc in the state. To be targeted in this way means that our power is increasing and that our state is becoming Blacker and browner each cycle. And that has become a threat to the leadership in the state, who are working very hard and systematically to ensure that we are disenfranchised from the process and disenchanted in our engagement.
But I think preparing people to really understand how to give public testimony and really kind of honing in on those key points is something that I think we can continue to work on and grow.
One of the things that we've learned through this process is to make sure that we are speaking on a collective level. That way we are taken very seriously about what we're talking about and what we're doing.
You have many community members that have never seen fairness, that their first impression of the Alabama state legislature and government is not fairness. So when we come to them and say fair maps, it's not that is better than redistricting, but we're still kind of, operating down a peg in terms of where we're trying to motivate people to, given all of the distractions that we're dealing with.
I heard one time that democracy is a leg that sits on 3 tables: voting rights, redistricting, and census.
Now it's about getting folks out again once they understand where the new districts exist, and making sure that they're empowered to vote, and making sure that we're still empowered to continue to fight for those voting rights. Mississippi and a lot of other southern states continue to kind of be at the bottom of the map in terms of voting rights. We don't have early voting. We don't have online voter registration. We don't have drop-in mailbox. So we don't have some of those privileges that other states have for voting. So we're still fighting for some of those privileges in states like Mississippi.
We've got to really teach people what it means in terms of governance, how governance works, and really do our own freedom schools, our own civic schools, so that people can know why it's important that they be engaged in this process, why it's important to have the right people that are drawing the lines, but the right people that will also implement the policies.
The bulk of the fight now is litigation. Currently, we have 4 cases, and we have investigations continuing into other redistricting plans that may be unlawful. And we have cases now challenging the Georgia congressional map, the Alabama state legislative map, the Jacksonville City Council map, the Mississippi Supreme Court map, challenging these redistricting plans as unlawful, either in violation of the Equal Protection Clause prohibition against racial gerrymandering, or the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and denial of equal opportunity to participate in the political process for people of color.
Our work now continues to build on the movement that we built in 2020 for participating in census, 2021 for participating in the redistricting process, and really understand in 2022 and the important cycles to come, what is the connection between redistricting and the lack of responsiveness we're seeing from our politicians, the lack of resources we have in our communities to fix streetlights, to close sewers, to make sure that no person in a storm and another act of God is left in boats waiting to see what politicians will do to get them food, shelter, and federal funding, for example. And we're seeing those connections also exist in high-profile issues, whether it's reproductive justice or gun safety and gun control, the lack of action by politicians can be directly connected to the redistricting process and the fact that lawmakers are generating districts that work for them and not their constituents.
Like census, we cannot wait another 10 years to begin a conversation about the importance of fair maps. We have to keep the momentum going, and we have to make redistricting a conversation that takes place 365 days a year.